Hello and welcome to a brand new Mind Mastery video. So today I'm going to talk about a slightly mystical and a little bit challenging subject of Kundalini experiences and other mystical experiences and how it all compares to a psychiatric condition of psychosis. So first of all, I'm not a psychiatrist, so please take my opinion slightly because I simply don't have authority to talk about as serious mental health disorders as psychosis is. So people tend to confuse these two similar experiences, which on the one side is Kundalini and on the other side is psychosis. So I hope to compare and contrast these two conditions, and hopefully we can come to conclusions of how to distinguish someone who goes through actual mystical experience and someone who suffers from a quite serious mental health disorder. The similarities obviously relate to the perceptual process. When you're awakening your Kundalini, your awareness changes, your perception changes, you're more sensitive to sensory data, your awareness is in a way sharpened so you can notice more details in your environment. Perhaps you suddenly come to very strange understandings of what's going on around you, what's happening to yourself, what's happening to your world. And this has a potential of, in a way, increasing your creativity because you are suddenly able to, understand the secrets of the universe. And in a way, your whole self might even, undergo dramatic changes of this experience. Suddenly you might become like a different person because you notice that many things in the world happening for a reason. In a way, various events are connected in a manner that you wouldn't imagine before. So, obviously it's a life-changing experience, that's in short. A person who suffers from psychosis, they might come to similar conclusions. They might suddenly gain very unusual insight into other people, into the world around us, into the whole universe. They might feel like if they are talking to God, that perhaps they are the manifestation of God themselves. And in a way, it could be very similar, if not the same, as a mystical experience. However, if we go a little bit deeper into psychology, we can spot the obvious differences. Now I'm going to use a Jungian model of the psyche because that could offer us the best understanding and insight into these both conditions, because primarily Carl Jung developed his theories in regards to patients who suffer from psychosis and schizophrenia. So he got really interested in that unconscious realm of the psyche. And so he started noticing various patterns that kept repeating in various patients' experiences. So he started developing this idea of archetypes and how they manifest in literally every person's psychology. So what happens is that when you, regardless whether it's a mystical experience or whether it's psychosis, when you start getting an insight into the unconscious mind, whether it's a personal unconscious and then collective unconscious, you start to get these really weird ideas, very unusual ideas about yourself and about the world. So in a way, when you lower the threshold of the consciousness and when your ego starts perceiving these different patterns and connections between various ideas and events in the world, that's where we can start talking about sort of mystical experience, because the perception becomes influenced by this archetypal imaginary from the unconscious mind. So it's not just the ideas that come to you from your own experience, but they come to you out of nowhere. It might seem like they come from, the spiritual realm, the mystical realm beyond your conscious mind. But that's where the similarities between the mystical or the Kundalini experience and the psychosis ends, because the very core of psychosis is the fact that your ego disintegrates. You lose your ego. Your ego is being dragged down into the unconscious realm. You start having a really challenging time distinguishing which perceptions come from the real world and which perceptions come from the unconscious realm, this imaginary realm of archetypes. So unfortunately, the psychotic person loses it. They don't know. They mix up the unconscious with the conscious. They mix up the archetypes with the actual patterns in the reality in front of them. Their mind becomes overwhelmed by this unconscious material. They stop being a master in their own house. And so their mind loses grasp on the reality because the ego stops being functional, because the ego cannot distinguish the real from the imaginary. In contrast, in the mystical experience, a person is able to navigate through these various images, archetypal images that pop into their mind. They are able to distinguish between, the actual world, the facts that are in front of them, but at the same time, they are staying in touch with that unconscious realm. So they're kind of living in two worlds, metaphorically speaking. And because they are staying in touch with that unconscious realm, all these images, all these ideas and insights they get, will still influence their perception of the real world, but they're not going to lose that, the primary perception, the primary understanding of what's happening around them and to them. Now, what about the ego death, which is a quite famous subject in, spiritual cycles? Well, if the Western person takes the ideas from the Eastern philosophies and religions, such as Buddhism or Hinduism, they're gonna try to interpret it all through the Western mind, through the Western understanding and what they've been taught at schools, at universities, and by the society. And it doesn't work that way. In order to understand the Eastern philosophies, you have to look at them and try to understand them from the Eastern perspective, not from the Western mind. So I think that ego death, it's not the literal death of your personality or the sense of I, but when you try to consciously work towards losing your ego, you're basically using the ego in order to get rid of the ego. Anyway, I'm getting off the subject. So if a person experiences the ego death, literal ego death, that means that the unconscious realm overwhelms the conscious mind. And as I've said before, this condition is called psychosis, where you allow the unconscious mind to rule over the conscious mind and conscious reality and conscious perception. So the ego death is probably not the best idea. But on the other hand, the ego is not all there is to your mind. It might be a point of attention, it might be the center of your personality, conscious personality, but it's not all there is. That's why we have all these disciplines like meditation, yoga, martial arts, where you train yourself to lower this threshold of the unconscious mind so that you are able to tolerate more and more of this imaginary archetypes from the unconscious mind. That's why many people suffer quite challenging consequences of trying to raise their Kundalini, because if you are not committed to any discipline, if you are not prepared to spare at least 10 minutes per day to, practice yoga or meditation, don't even start with Kundalini, because you're risking your mental health, your physical health, probably your time, your money, perhaps even your whole life. Because, these people have been doing it for thousands of years. They know what they're doing. So if you cannot follow the discipline, if you just prefer to read some manuals on the internet written by, some dude from California practicing yoga or whatever, then you might end up in a really weird place. Kundalini might lead to psychosis if you are not prepared to, commit to that discipline. But psychosis will not lead to a Kundalini. Psychosis is not a mystical experience. Okay, lastly, I wanted to show you two accounts of the so-called mystical experience. One is made by a person suffering from psychosis, and the other is done by some regular person not known if they suffer any mental health problems. I think you can spot the obvious difference. The psychotic obviously has identified himself with the unconscious realm, with this archetypal imaginary coming to his mind. And Carl Jung has, emphasized like hundreds of times, don't identify with the unconscious because it's going to lead you astray. Now, on the other hand, if we look at the other account, there's some benefit of the doubt the person is not sure what they experience. You know, the ego is kept secure in the small little bubble, but at the same time, it's not rigid enough to dismiss the whole experience, to dismiss the unconscious realm. I hope it clarifies a lot of things. If you think that you're going through psychotic experience, please get some help. If you think you're going through Kundalini awakening, please also get some help. Either commit to some discipline or find a person experienced in it. Or if you cannot do any of this, please also seek medical help, because, you know, Kundalini experiences is not a joke. There is some controversy about this experience, but at the same time, there are also many accounts of people who went completely astray because they couldn't follow the discipline, they couldn't follow any teacher, and then they wonder why they end up in a psychiatric hospital. I hope you take it seriously, and I hope to see you in the next video. Thank you.